Great, good evening, everyone. Oh, it's bright under the lights, isn't it? Yep, really good to see you. So I'm Sarah, if we've not met before, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with you tonight on the topic of thoughts and mindset. And I've called this evening's talk, The Battle for Your Mind. Did you know there's a battle going on there? And if not, hopefully by the end of this evening, you will be more aware of that, but also have real hope knowing what God can do for us in the battle. So a little bit about my background. So I worked as a GP in the NHS for about 25 years. And then over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been involved in running leadership. I've been involved in conflict resolution training for healthcare professionals, as well as some leadership development here at church. Okay, so I want to start with a question. What's the tone of your inner voice on an average day? So not what you say out loud, not what other people hear, but the way that you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. Just take a moment with that. How does your inner voice sound? Is it kind? Is it pressured? Is it a low-level critical commentary that's running in the background? Because actually for many of us, the most exhausting place to be and that we live in isn't our circumstances. It is actually our own mind. That internal monologue, the assumptions that we carry around with us, and the thoughts that we return to again and again, often without even realizing it. And what makes this really tricky is that most of the thoughts we have don't sound obviously wrong. They sound reasonable, they sound responsible. Sometimes they even sound wise. So we don't question our thoughts, we just agree with them. But our thoughts over time steadily shape us. So here's the line that I want you to hold on to tonight. It's going to come up on the slide. Not every thought we have is true, and not every thought deserves your full attention. And why does this matter? Well, I think it matters more than we think. And in Romans 12, Paul writes, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Let's just say that together. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Because that's where transformation begins. So it's not just in changed behavior, it's not just having more willpower, but it's the renewal of your mind. And the word that Paul uses is metamorpho, or metamorpho, I'm not sure. It has a double O, so let's say metamorpho. And it's where we get metamorphosis. That's the same thing that happens for a caterpillar. So it's not a surface level adjustment. It's a complete restructuring from the inside out. And Paul in 2 Corinthians 10 says we need to take every thought captive. And that means something really, really important. We don't just have thoughts, we relate to our thoughts, don't we? We respond to them, we decide what gets to stay. Because here's what's actually happening underneath the surface of our mind. Our thoughts shape our emotions. Our emotions shape our reactions. Your reactions become patterns. And your patterns over time become who you are. They become your character. They become your life. But here's where this goes even deeper. Because most of our thinking isn't conscious. It's automatic. It's patterned. It's what we've learned to think in order to cope, to stay safe, to function. And that means we're not just dealing with random thoughts. We're dealing with our formation. And I know that the way I think has been really shaped by everything that I've experienced, both positive and negative, especially early on. And the meanings that I've made about myself, about the world, about whether I was loved or whether I was capable or enough. And I don't know if that rings true with you. And those meanings don't just disappear as we get older. They actually become the lens through which we see everything else. One of the most helpful things that I've come across in understanding how we can change is the idea of autopilot. And I'm sure you've heard of that before, people saying, I've been on autopilot. We all run on it. So just think about a situation that you know always triggers certain thoughts for you. Just try and bring to mind, what's the situation where you always get the same thought? And those thoughts trigger certain emotions, And then you find yourself reacting in a familiar way. And I want to tell you something that happened to me because I think this can illustrate better than any theory could do. So a few years ago during COVID, I was fairly new to a job. I was still in my probation period. And then one afternoon, just before a bank holiday, I think it was the May bank holiday weekend 6 years ago, a diary invite landed from my manager. And the title of it was Probation Discussion. That was it. No other context, no email to go with it. And I want to tell you that within about 30 seconds, I had completely decided what that meant. I was going to be fired. I must have done something wrong. Something since I started had obviously gone really badly, and I hadn't even realized it. And by the time I closed my laptop that day, I was already mentally working through what I was going to do when I no longer had a job there. And then I had an entire bank holiday weekend to sit with it. My husband will testify that I ruminated over it. I went over everything in my mind, every meeting, every conversation, every email that I could think of, just looking what I got wrong, building a case against myself with evidence that I'd largely made up. And when I got to the meeting, do you know what it was about? The company had changed its policy. Probation was now 3 months instead of 6. She just needed to formally note it. That was it. Could she have sent that in an email? Absolutely. And since I manage people now, I'm really conscious of that. It would have saved me a significant amount of worry. But here's the thing. The problem wasn't the diary invite. That was the trigger. The problem was what my mind did with it before I had the whole picture. I didn't choose that reaction consciously. It just ran automatically, and it ran fast because somewhere from previous experiences, I'd learned that being called in for an unexpected meeting meant I was in trouble. And that's an example of autopilot. That's what formation had done for me, and I can see for many people it's often the same. It shapes how we then interpret situations before our conscious mind has actually weighed in. So a question for you. Where do you keep getting stuck? Where do you get stuck internally? Where do you end up with that same reaction, the same thought, the same emotional pattern, the same spiral? Where does that happen for you? Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's frustration. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's a wave of self-criticism that just comes over you before you've even started your day. And when you think honestly about that, that's not new. It's a pattern. It's familiar. And that's part of the problem sometimes, because when things are familiar, they often feel like the truth. But here's what's often going on underneath. Underneath many of our habitual thought patterns is a belief, like a conclusion that we've drawn about ourselves or about others or about God. And sometimes these beliefs are almost like a kind of internal promise that we've made to ourselves. We've decided that we're going to be a certain way so that we are safe, or we think we'll be safe. And it might sound something like this: I have to hold everything together or things will fall apart. I can't afford to show any weakness. If people really knew me, they'd be disappointed and reject me. That was a big one for me. And those aren't thoughts that we're always aware of, as I said, consciously. Those have been formed in us by past experience, by past hurts, and they stick with us, running in the background on that autopilot, shaping how we interpret things. So the problem isn't that we have thoughts, but the problem is we don't often notice what are we thinking, or more importantly, where has that come from? So I'm going to share 3 thought patterns that I think are pretty common, and you might recognize one or more of them. The first one, I'm not going to ask for any raising of hands, but all of these are familiar for me. First one is, I should be better I should be better than this by now. And when that thought arrives, what are we actually believing? Maybe we're believing that growth and change should be faster. Maybe we're believing that failure says something about who we are, not just what we did. And what emotion sits next to that thought? Often it's shame. And I really think shame is worth naming here, because shame does something very specific. I'm very familiar with that shame. Shame doesn't say, you did something wrong. What does shame say? there's something wrong with you. And that's a really different thing. Whereas guilt, when guilt is healthy, guilt moves you towards repair. It says, I got that wrong, I need to put it right. But shame doesn't do that. Shame makes us hide. It makes us attempt to manage other people's perceptions. It makes us keep things in the dark because we're afraid of being fully seen. So that thought, I should be better than this by now, doesn't move us forwards. It keeps us stuck. It makes us less likely to bring things into the light. So let me ask you, when you feel any sense of failure, do you move towards God or away from him? My tendency in the past was to move away because I felt I couldn't approach God when I had that sense of shame or failure. And do you bring that real version of yourself to prayer or the edited one that we think God needs to see? Now, King David, who wrote the Psalms, he didn't bring an edited version to God. Psalm 139 says that David said, "Search me, God, know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." So that's a real invitation to full exposure, isn't it? And that's the kind of honesty that breaks shame's grip. Secondly, here's another common thought pattern. If I don't hold everything together, things will fall apart. What's underneath this one? Control. I have to hold everything together. But underneath control sits fear, and underneath the fear, often a much deeper belief. This is, if I let go, bad things will happen to me and to those I care about. And underneath that, sometimes there's a real question about whether God can really be trusted with the things that matter most to us. And I know that this pattern of thinking tends to wear us out. It tends to lead to exhaustion because the weight of trying to hold everything together over time with things that were never ours to carry wears us out, but we take that burden on. So just sit with that question. Where might you be holding responsibility or carrying responsibility that's not actually yours, that God never intended you to take? Or maybe that belief of, I can't fully trust God to keep me safe. And then a third thought pattern. Everyone else is doing better than me. Now this one is subtle because at first glance it feels like a humble observation, but it's not really an observation. What is it? It's comparison, isn't it? And underneath comparison there's usually something about our identity. Like, am I enough? Do I measure up? Am I behind? I don't know about you, but does anyone else feel a bit behind with AI? Or is no one else worried about that? Maybe it's just me. But, that kind of thing, am I behind? And the painful thing about comparison is that it never actually answers the question. You can compare yourself to someone doing worse and feel temporary relief. Or you can compare yourself to someone doing better and feel deflated. But neither of those comparisons really tells you the truth about who you are. So what or who are you measuring yourself against right now? And is that leading to true insight, or is it leading to a false sense of pride or fear? So let's think about formation rather than effort, because here's where many of us can go wrong when we try to change. We think the answer is to try harder in the moment. We capture negative thoughts, we tell ourselves to stop, we decide to think more positively, we promise ourselves we'll do things differently when we're triggered. Does that work? It might in the short term, but it doesn't stick for long. Because you can't override years of ingrained patterns with willpower in the moment. I know, I've tried hard. And so this is what Paul is pointing to with that word, metamorphosis. And I think it's just worth taking a closer look about what actually happens inside a chrysalis. So it's not that the caterpillar grows wings. I thought that was what happened. The caterpillar doesn't grow wings while it's in there and become a butterfly. That's not how it works. What happens is far more radical. the caterpillar's body actually breaks down, almost completely. And the structures it had, the ones that made it what it was, dissolve. And for a period, there's something that looks biologically like chaos, like soup, like nothing useful is happening at all. And then slowly, something new is organized from that same material. Not a modified caterpillar, but something genuinely different, built from within. And the butterfly emerges through that process. And that's metamorphosis. That's the word that Paul chose deliberately about being transformed, because real transformation doesn't look impressive from the outside. It happens in those hidden, slow, unglamorous in-between, in the chrysalis of a safe morning, a still morning, a conversation with a safe person. A moment of prayerful openness where you stop performing and you just tell God what's really going on in your mind. Now, a caterpillar can't will itself into being a butterfly. The process requires the right conditions and then time. So right conditions and time for transformation. And as I've said, neither can we override years of formed patterns by deciding to think or behave differently. But we can create the conditions. We can slow down. We can stop hiding. We can invite the Spirit of God into places where the old patterns are still running the show on autopilot. And that's not passivity. That's one of the most courageous things that we can do. And so creating those conditions, those new rhythms, that's exactly what I just want to talk about next. Because the battle for your thought life is actually a battle for your identity, for who you believe you are, for whether you can trust God in everything, and for whether love is genuinely real, his love is genuinely real. And so, as I said, the battle of the mind is not fixed by trying harder. It's fixed by encounter, by truth, by the slow, patient work of letting God speak into those places that have been formed by something else. So I'm just going to give you something practical in terms of a framework. If you've heard me speak before, I like frameworks. I like three things, simple but weighty. So these are strength, support, and discernment. So these are the things that I believe we need for that transformation. So firstly, briefly, strength. So strength is about training our mind, not trying harder, but training our mind so that we don't just react to thoughts. Really, the key here for strength is becoming more aware of our thoughts and bringing them to God for that metamorphosis. And the single most common thing that I notice in people who have got stuck isn't that they don't want to change, but it's a lack of awareness about their thoughts. They're so busy, so fast, so buried in noise that they can't accurately hear what's going on in their minds. And I was talking to a friend about this not long ago, someone committed to growth, committed to discipleship, and she said, I don't think I've sat still with myself and God for about 3 months. And she'd not noticed that stillness was missing until she reflected. And I don't think that's unusual. That's most of us. I know a few years ago, I had to teach myself to actually be still and to be rather than just doing all the time. So that practice begins with something deceptively simple, just slowing down and unhurrying. I don't know if anyone's read the book by John Mark Comer, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. If you haven't, I'd really recommend a read. It really challenges you to unhurry deliberately. Like go in the slowest queue at the supermarket, go in the slowest queue at the petrol station and not go on your phone. I think you've talked about this before, Josh, haven't you? Actually make yourself practice, stretch that muscle of unhurrying. So ask yourself this question: when do you really slow down enough to notice your thoughts and be more aware of what's going on in your heart and your mind? Not to ruminate on those thoughts that bring you down, but to be able to bring them to God, to create some space to be quiet, to ask God to show you who you really are in his sight, and then let his love strengthen your mind. And then secondly, support. You're never meant to do this alone. One of the things that can keep destructive patterns, again, stuck is isolation. Because when thoughts stay only in our heads, they tend to get louder, they tend to get more repetitive, they lose perspective, they start to feel like fact. Whereas some thoughts will lose their power the moment that they're spoken. So this might be that you speak them out loud to someone wise, someone that you trust, someone who can look at you and say, I don't think that is actually true about you. So who does that for you? Who helps you process what's going on inside? Who's in your life that can challenge your thinking? Who can remind you of what is true when you might have lost sight of that truth? And that's why being part of community in church is so, so important, so that we can be that source of support for each other. And then thirdly, discernment. This is the core one. Discernment is learning to ask, is this thought reliable and wise? What is this thought producing in me? Where is it coming from? Because some of our thoughts need to be challenged, and some need to be replaced with something that's more deeply, spiritually true. Some thoughts we don't even need to follow. We can just let them pass, and we can just name some thoughts. So 2 Corinthians 10 says again, take every thought captive. And that assumes that some thoughts will try to take us captive first. So discernment helps us weigh our thoughts up and choose which to engage with. So as I wrap up, here's 4 practices to help you. Small, consistent changes that can create that strength, that support, and the discernment. So firstly, slowing. I've mentioned already, but I'm just reinforcing it. Creating that space, unhurrying, to notice your thoughts and asking yourself, what keeps coming up? What's the tone of my inner voice today? Secondly, second finger, reflection, asking, what am I believing right now? So not what am I feeling, but what conclusion have I come to? What might be underneath this feeling that's not true? What's keeping me stuck here? Thirdly, prayerful honesty. Bringing your real thoughts to God, not the edited, presentable version of reality, because God already knows, doesn't he? And he wants us to be real with him. Then community, saying things out loud to someone you trust. Actually, I've got 5. I don't count them on my script. 5th one is rest, because exhaustion is one of the fastest routes, isn't it, to distorted thinking. When I'm tired, I don't know about you, but my thinking is very distorted. So none of these are complicated, are they? But they require intention, they require commitment. Because in a busy world that we're all living in, the default is to stay hurried, to stay distracted, and to let that autopilot keep on running. And your current rhythms, the current habits that you have, they're perfectly designed to produce your current mindset. But is it the mindset that you want and that God has the best for you? So if you want something different as an output, something has to change in the input. So let me finish with this and just a reminder of what we put up on the screen earlier. You are not your thoughts, but your thoughts are shaping you. And transformation, real transformation, doesn't come from trying harder in the moment. But instead, we need to be metamorphosed. We need to let the renewal happen. We need to give God access to those places where our thinking has been formed by something other than truth. And I really believe that the Spirit of God is working patiently, persistently, in the very places where our thinking has been shaped by something not from him, something from the enemy, from words spoken over us, from difficult experiences. And God invites us to show up, honestly, with community, with a willingness to keep noticing. So remember, not every thought is true. Not every thought deserves our attention. But the question, that discernment, is which thoughts are you going to keep agreeing with and engaging with?